Hi everyone. I just wanted to jump on today and say that I'm planning to do some podcasts on my YouTube channel. And originally I started this channel to support the things that I was doing on 7 Cups of Tea, but as most people know, I haven't been active on there for quite some time, possibly over a year now. And I thought, well, I have this channel, I should do something with it. So I thought something that would be simple for me to do would be a podcast, and I can share that in other places too. And when I get that set up, I'll let you know where this podcast is going to be. I wanted to talk a little bit about stigma and why I feel that stigma starts with us. And I know that might sound a little bit strange. You might even be mad at me for saying that. And part of you will be right. But I guess I wanted to bring a different perspective to the conversation. There's a lot of, social media posts and media attention in general on mental health, which I think is great because it starts conversation. And the people in my life that have made the most impact have been the people who were willing to be vulnerable and talk about their own mental health issues. And I feel sometimes that we expect everybody else to accept us the way that we are so that we can not worry about, say, our personalities coming out at work or having a panic attack in the bathroom. But on the same hand, we stigmatise ourselves all the time. There's always part of us, and I'm going to call it shame, that stigmatises us on a daily basis, where we don't accept who we are. We try and stuff it down. We try and hide the fact that we've got these personalities. We don't talk about them. We pretend they don't exist. And I've been in counselling now for 7 years, and I haven't always known about my other personalities. But even now, after all the counselling that I've been through, there's still days, even weeks, where I get stuck in the loop of, it's not real, I'm lying to myself, I just made it all up. And in the context of stigma, if we're calling ourselves liars on a daily basis, and then we leave our houses or we're on the internet and we put ourselves out there and we say, I've got DID, and someone else comes along and says, that's not a real disorder, we get angry. And yes, we should get angry. But maybe ending stigma can start with ending the stigmatizing self-talk. And maybe the world might change just a little bit because we've changed. And maybe that can be like a ripple in the ocean that gets bigger. And maybe our vulnerability, our openness, the way we've coped with things can inspire somebody else in their journey. And maybe our survivorship can be someone else's inspiration, someone else's courage. Because one thing that I've learned is, as I've come away from 7 Cups, and I'll get into a bit later on about why I chose to leave, but as I've come away from 7 Cups and I've gone into other groups, normal life type situations, for me, my faith is quite important, so joining a church was something that was really good for me, and obviously therapy. What that does is it gives you a glimpse of a new reality, because in our trauma, it's all consuming and it can become the only reality that we have. And if that's our only reality, that's all we've ever seen, how could we possibly know what to hope for? Because we have no tangible grasp on what something different looks like. And it's the ultimate lie of trauma to isolate. Because for me, my self-stigma improved when I stopped isolating and I got into a community and made real connections with people. And that's part of the reason why therapy is so healing, is because you have somebody who keeps you in positive regard. No matter what you say, you can say the most horrific things, and I have in my time. I've talked about things that made me feel so shameful and so broken and imperfect and horrible, but brave and courageous and strong all at the same time. And it's a weird mix. And I feel like the one thing that community does, especially for people with DID, is if it's a healthy community, it gives you a chance to explore who you are and who others are. And it gives you a sense of reality that is not based in trauma. It gives you a sense of, well, this person's into this thing and this person's into this thing. And it's almost like going to a clothing store and trying on outfits. And you can try on an outfit and you can say, well, I kind of like this aspect of that way of living, but I'm not really into this, and this. So say you take the necklace away from that experience, and then you meet somebody else and you think, oh, this person's really creative, I'm into that. But I'm not really a painter. I like to write with my words. Or, well, for me it would be the opposite, because I love to paint. But I'm learning that I can change my creativity. But anyway, going back to the outfits, we're trying on all these different ways of being, and I've tried on loads of things. Minimalism, I'm a vegan now. I never thought that 2 years ago. And, you know, there's lots of different things in life that can be explored if you're willing to step outside of the isolation. And don't get me wrong, I know how much courage that takes. But I feel like if we're going to end stigma, that we have to be seen. And if we're going to be safe in our being seenness, we need to learn boundaries so that we know when it's safe to share and when it's wise to keep things inside that we're not ready to talk about yet. And I don't mean that in a stuffing your trauma down kind of way and ignoring it's not there. Definitely not. But as you be around people, the more and more you learn what's safe, what's not safe, and you learn the type of people that are more likely to suit you and your personality or personalities, and that you increase the chances of success as you step out and you start to communicate. And this new phase that I'm in now is realizing that one of the things that I didn't learn was how to represent myself, and I still don't really know, but I know that I need to now, and that's a lot more than I did know. And I feel like that is what enabled me to see the issue around self-stigma. And I can't say to you guys that one day we'll get to a place where I can go to work and say, sorry, I can't deal with today because I'm a 5-year-old and I woke up making bubbles in the bathroom sink. Yeah, that literally happened to me at work once. But I can't imagine that will ever be okay, because at the end of the day, if you're being paid to do a job, you need to be able to do the job. And I think being creative, accepting that for the period of life you're in, and being creative about how you problem solve that, is something positive that you can do to make yourself feel less hopeless. And that's the other thing about self-stigma, is it feeds our shame and it feeds the hopelessness, and it robs us from this community and connection that we could use to heal. And I think the ultimate goal is to make a life for us where what's going on in our inside is reflected on the outside, that we can truly be an authentic representation of ourselves as we walk through the process. And that's no easy thing at all, but it's something that I desire. And I've noticed that in my own journey to working things out, that the more I have been able to represent myself and share what's inside of me with other people, other people have come to me and said, I really liked what you said. You're really honest. You said it really clearly, and it resonated with me, and in some way it helped give me an idea of a step forward. And if we could all do that at some point in our journey, when it's the right time for us, I think that could go a long way to getting rid of stigma. And the second thing I wanted to talk about is related in community, but I wanted to talk about what good community isn't, because I feel like one of the reasons I haven't stepped out more and talked more about DID on YouTube or anywhere really is because I didn't really want to associate everything that I am with everything that had happened to me. I am more than my trauma. I'm more than my diagnosis. And the reason why I believe that is because I've seen people go through diagnosis changes, and it's really thrown them because they've over-identified with the diagnosis. And, you know, guys, diagnosis is really helpful because it can point you in the direction of helpful tools. It can give you a clue as to what's going on, but it's never who you are. And as much as I love the different parts of me inside, there is a version of me that is me healed. And one day I hope to see that in my life. And while my parts are here, I love them. I look after them. I treat them as part of me. I respect their love. I respect their bravery and the sheer amount of pain that they went through to keep me alive. But I also accept that how they are now might not be the forever me, because even my parts have changed, you know. I think integration and fusion is a topic for another day, but I think it's helpful to have an idea of who you are that is not based in trauma and is not based in diagnosis. I was just trying to think of a practical example. I suppose today I was at church and one of the ladies asked me if my family thing went okay at the weekend. And I said, you know, yeah, it did. But it was really hard for me. I was very tired when I come home, and I said, I think I did too much socialising because I'd gone to church and then gone straight out to this family thing. So I spent the whole day around people. And one thing I know about myself is I am an introvert. And I need time alone to fill back up my cup before I pour it out for others. And it would be so easy for me to say, well, I'm traumatized and I don't like talking to people and I isolate. And sometimes, if I'm honest, that's my reality. But that's not who I am. Who I am is an introvert. And okay, my introversion one day might be triggered by the fact that I'm having a bad day and I don't want to speak to anyone. But, if my actual personality is an introvert, then maybe for me, staying at home and painting in my journal or scribbling out some words is the best self-care I can do in that bad time. So I wouldn't ever want to say isolation is wrong. It's not in the right context. And the same thing is with community. As much as I love everybody who puts themselves out there and talks about DID, one thing that bothers me is this need to over-identify with others that have DID. And I think some of that is from the self-stigma of wanting to believe that you are not really ill, because if you're not ill, then you don't have all these things to deal with and life can be okay for a minute. And that's a level of control that we like to keep and pull out when things get too much. And that has been adaptive and helpful in the past, especially if you, like me, have come out of mind control programming and you were programmed to be silent and being silent meant safety, then of course you're going to want to be silent. But once you're not in that situation anymore, it's no longer adaptive to stay silent. And this leads me on to a little bit about 7 Cups and why I left. So as you guys know, I was part of the leadership team and I used to help out in the workbook group, and I shared my story on there about a bit about what had happened to me and the fact that I'd grown up in a cult and gone through mind control programming and various things from my family life. I think I shared in there as well. And I had to get permission to post my story, and I was told to change the words, and I said no. And we argued back and forth about it, and I said, look, if you want me to share my story, I'm going to use my words. And I hadn't been gory in the details. I didn't talk about being tortured or things of that nature. And I was told that I had to put trigger warnings over everything, which seemed over the top for how I'd written it, and it bothered me. So I did my story, I joined the team, and I started to do the workbook group. And then I started to be told that I wasn't allowed to talk about ritual abuse, and I wasn't allowed to talk about mind control programming in case it triggered in somebody that they had gone through ritual abuse and mind control programming. And honestly, I felt silenced. I felt like it was okay for everybody else to talk about their stuff because it was the regular kind of DID, but somehow mine was too bad, that I was too wrong to be allowed to talk about it. And I could understand if maybe I had been the type of person who would just blurt everything out and not really think about everyone else, but I'm quite a considered person. I'm very reserved, unless I feel like I have to say something and I feel like there's a reason to say it, pretty much don't. And so to be asked to join in the group and support other people and not be able to speak about things that were hurting me was so painful. And it got to the point where I wasn't even allowed to ask questions. And I think that's when I started to struggle. And then I would go to team meetings, and there were a few people who just seemed to always be on a rampage, and their emotions were just out there for everybody. And I appreciated the fact that everybody needs to get things off their chest, but it wasn't equal. Like, I was being silenced, and then they were allowed to shout as loud and as horrible and as much as they wanted. And I was like, this isn't healthy. It was actually getting to a point of being toxic. And the one thing that bothered me about the member-listener setup is when I had a scenario where I had a friendship with another member, and I love them. I think they're great. And then they connected with me as a listener, but they didn't tell me I already knew them. And so I honestly felt betrayed, because I feel like they'd hidden from me who they were. And when you struggle to trust, that's quite a difficult thing. And then this listener was also part of the team and went on to use things that I'd told them as a member or in a listener session against me, and I wasn't okay with it. And we did the active listening course to become a listener, and I broke the rules. I would tell people, hey, my member name is this, because they'd built a relationship with me, and I wasn't going to pretend that I was somebody else. I didn't feel that that was right. And I also didn't feel that it was right that active listening was the only training that we got. And we were being expected to talk to people who'd gone through some really horrific things. And there was a big fuss at some point about a listener who didn't want to take talks about sexual abuse. And we're like, but you're on the trauma team. And the reason is because they hadn't dealt with it themselves and they weren't ready to talk about it, which is totally fine. But then I didn't feel it was appropriate for them to be a leader in the trauma team, because when you have a leader say, actually, it's not okay for you to talk about that, you feel silenced or you feel broken. And there was never any explanation to the members as to why this person didn't want to talk about it, just that they didn't talk about it. And I think that's okay when you say, so for example, some people chose not to speak about other disorders because they have no experience of it, and to me that's totally fine. But you haven't joined the team that talks about that specific disorder or that specific area of recovery. So yeah, there was that going on. And there was other people who proliferated false information, which I felt was quite damaging, because take DID for example, there was a whole group of people who believed that it wasn't based in trauma, and that's simply not factual. There's so much research that says it's trauma based, and usually before the ages of 5 to 9. Although the cut-off age seems to change depending on whose research I read, but as a general rule, it's early childhood trauma. And it bothered me that we had a lack of training. We were not required to have gone through therapy ourselves to join the team. There was no testing or checks on us to make sure that we had a level of self-awareness to know that we were talking out of our own pain and not really listening to somebody else the way that they needed. That's the reason why therapists have supervision, is to make sure that the relationship stays healthy. And there were people who were listeners that were just toxic. They had no boundaries. They were angry, and I don't know, I call it PTSD rage because that's how it feels when I experience it. But I mean, I left in the end because I couldn't see a way of making it healthy and safe. And when I realised that and really faced it, I had to grieve the loss of the community because it was hard. They were my friends, and when I disagreed with them on things, they turned on me and shunned me, and it was painful. Yeah. So for me, that's another kind of stigma, that because you don't experience pain the way I do is not valid, or my pain's worse than yours, or we say to ourselves that our pain is not enough to have DID or not enough to be traumatized, and it's all rubbish. There's a spectrum, yep, that's factual. Yep, if you have DID, then the likelihood is that the trauma happened earlier and it was more repetitive and it's harder to get over. But trauma's trauma. And it can be painful. And it can be hard. It can take longer to get over because we don't have the community and coping skills that maybe someone who experienced trauma in later life has. But that just means that we've got something else to learn before we heal. I don't think it means that anyone is in more pain or less pain than anyone else. Anyway, I feel like I went onto a side issue there, and I guess I want to finish by saying that I love you all. Please be kind to yourself. Please don't stigmatize yourself. And if it helps, imagine that somebody that you really love is going through what you're going through, and write out in your journal what you would say to them. And then read it back to yourself. And then maybe one day we can really end stigma, starting with ourselves. Thanks for listening, guys. Bye.